In the mid to late 90s, the stories about bodybuilder Lee Priest were insane. Wild speculation from his sex life to steroid use, the crazy off-season blowouts and career-damaging blow-ups, reports of illness, retirement, and imminent demise fueled the era's out-of-control gossip columns. Standing a mere 5'5", Priest was one of the largest pound-for-pound bodybuilders, one of the sport's youngest pros, and voted for possessing some of the best arms in history. He's also famous for being the man who almost mentally broke a young up-and-coming Ronnie Coleman. With his undeniable good looks, magnetic charisma, and membership to the newly emerging 90s Freak Fest, few cultivated a following as polarizing as Priest's. The guy seemed destined for either stardom or self-destruction. Looking more like an overstuffed beef burrito in the off-season, it's no surprise that an almost 300-pound Priest was for consecutive years a leading frontrunner in the internet's unofficial Deadpool. Yet the quixotic Priest's biggest battle has been less with the iron or his own mortality, and more one projected against the prevailing politics and corrupt power structures of the sport. The reasons behind a young man's decision to pick up that first weight are many. The spark that lights that young man's obsessive drive for muscularity is infinitely more complex. Comic book superheroes have always been at their core an adolescent power fantasy. The pain of a family divorce drove many kids of the 80s towards an attachment to superheroes. The exaggerated muscles of characters like He-Man were designed to inspire feelings of self-worth and empowerment. He-Man's sword provided the bridge to power and self-transformation. The iron would do the same for Lee, giving him the power which he, like every kid, needed during the emotionally turbulent times. For Lee, these steroid-infused masters of the toy universe not only looked powerful, they clearly delineated the forces between good and evil. When the bad guys punched down, He-Man punched right back. A fascination with Superman soon followed, and Lee's mum indulged her strength-obsessed son with homemade costumes. And while He-Man provided an aspirational visual template, Superman stood as a symbol of morality and fairness, a touchstone for distinguishing between right and wrong, and an undeniable icon of masculinity for kids bereft of father figures. Years later, Lee discovered the real secret behind his father's sexuality and parents' divorce, providing, in Lee's words, the spark that really got him into bodybuilding. And while Lee attaches a disaffected nonchalance to this pivotal life event, his mother and sister insinuate that schoolyard bullies left an indelible mark on his psyche. For a young man growing up in the overbearing masculine culture of 1980s Australia, with all its idiosyncrasies and pronounced homophobia, the traumatic residue could hardly be denied. With his biological father soon disowning him, Lee's grandfather Owen filled the void with support and encouragement, a pivotal influence bonding over their mutual love of the iron. And just like the superheroes Priest idolized, champion bodybuilders are arguably born, not made. Lee's true superpower was discovering his life's calling early, and he attacked the weights with a single-minded intensity, dedication, and his newly discovered gift for building muscle. With an early developed sense of self and purpose, Lee's manifest rebellious streak began challenging everything from pointless classroom rules to illogical Sunday school dogma. Authority represented just another force of resistance to be overcome, and he soon withdrew from formal schooling to focus on his training. Lee's love of training collided with the kayfabe of competitive bodybuilding. Transmuting his obsession into a paid vocation necessitated the obligatory show jumping through the amateur hurdles. Naturally shy, he was uncomfortably averse to the performative display and subjective judging. This wonderkind quickly established himself, crushing the egos and dreams of those in the competitive ranks, much older and experienced. And by 16 he possessed one of the best physiques in the country, winning national titles but still bereft that magical pro card that was rightfully his due. The Australian arm of the IFBB, who ran the sport like its own tin pot dictatorship, declared the deserving Priest too young for a pro card. These arbitrary fabrications aside, Priest was soon to be inducted in the reality of politically motivated vendettas and poor judging decisions. Bodybuilding history is littered with the corpses of similar hard-working athletes, sacrificed in a game of corrupt ulterior motives and ego-driven self-interest. Despite passing rigorous drug tests before the 1990 Mr. Universe competition, Lee was confronted by the sleazy porn-stashed wearing promoter Bob Goodman. With Goodman's shit-eating grin, he informed Priest that he was disqualified for failing the drug test. Priest's B sample had been conveniently lost, and Lee's subsequent appeals to the Australian IFBB fell on deaf ears in fear of contradicting this interlinked web of lies. Declared a drug cheat, Priest's name was splashed across the headlines of this small-minded provincial backwater media. Rage directed inward, the emotionally distraught Priest introduced his wrist to the dull end of a knife blade. The attempt at self-harm, his only means of making sense of this soul-destroying decision. It was an event that set the tone for future antagonism for the lies of the shit-eating Bob Goodmans of this world. Likewise, the Australian bodybuilding scene was fast becoming a competitive cul-de-sac, and larger ponds soon beckoned. Ed Connors, who co-owned Golds with his undeniable eye for spotting raw talent, provided accommodation, financial support, and connections to many of the sport's top up-and-comers. When Connors was asked who he thought was the greatest bodybuilder in his 30 years of rubbing shoulders with the best, he always answered Lee Priest. Lee's trip to the epicenter of bodybuilding turned from an initial intended 2-week stay into an 18-year odyssey. Initially lured by false promises, Priest credits Ed Connors for saving his ass, providing Lee a home and a financial lifeline. Connors relates how Priest's fiancée cheated on him with another house guest, French bodybuilder Louis Colombe, before going on to clean out Priest's prize money and hightailing it back to Australia. A letter received from another former fling included a photograph of a young baby, announcing to Lee that he was now a father. But for the new prodigy in town, Priest had no time for these kinds of distractions. With Connors' help, he finally secured that coveted pro card. Connors also introduced Priest to the Master Blaster himself, Joe Weider, who added Lee to his prestigious roster of sponsored athletes. The money, although a pittance, was at least for Lee an income for doing the thing he most loved. Lee began dipping his toes into the competitive waters of the burgeoning 90s pro scene and their increasingly packed lineups. He first extricated himself from the Gold's Gym circus. The initial novelty of celebrity spotting had become its own distraction. The unwelcoming reception from established resident pros like Wheeler, Cormier, and Jim Quinn, perhaps sensing the potential threat of this recent Antipodean import, turned the atmosphere decidedly frosty. From the inhospitable mirage of Golds, Priest moved camp to the comparable oasis of Worlds, nurtured by the paternal oversight of the elderly Joe Gold. Gold's old-school sensibilities and custom-built equipment resonated with Priest's own train hard and eat big philosophy. 90s bodybuilding was on the cusp of radical change. A new era was brewing, and its new breed dislodging the firmaments of the old. With their confrontational mass, bodybuilders like Yates symbolized a petulant rebellion to the existing tyranny of convention and expectations, wresting control over the judging criteria and imposing a new extreme that would forever take bodybuilding in a new, unfathomable direction. Combining the qualities of maximum size, leanness and dryness, the existing classical aesthetic was losing ground to something superhuman, outlandish and extreme. Priest himself expressed a desire to elicit the same disquieting revulsion of this emerging era of freaks. Give him the Eddie Robinsons, the Tom Platzes, the Matarazzos, the Dillettes and Yateses, over the Labrada, Parises and Sean Rays any day. He wanted people to look at him and proclaim, "Yuck, what the fuck is that?" The fans loved to see the mass. The fans came to see the freaks. After respectable showings in the '94 Arnold Classic, Ironman Pro, Night of Champions and San Jose, Priest consulted Weider requesting an exemption from the upcoming Houston show to focus on that year's Olympia. Exemption granted, fax sent to the IFBB officers. Lee once again ran afoul of Federation politics and was suspended a year for breach of contract. IFBB Vice President Wayne D'Amelia stated that no communication had been forthcoming explaining Priest's no-show. Fine paid and suspension eventually lifted. Priest made steady improvements throughout the 1995 competitive season. Compared to today's pampered shit show, the 90s was a time when competitors actually earned their stripes, exposing themselves to the cauldron of competition by competing across a range of shows. By now, Priest was a solid fixture in the industry spotlight. His hard, old-school approach to training, hard eating and straight talk, his brutally honest candour, coupled with his zero-fucks attitude, firmly ensconced him as a fan favourite. Branded the Giant Killer, the Blonde Myth, the Pocket Yates, Priest's star was on the rise, but he was growing increasingly critical of the IFBB's treatment of its athletes, locking them into contractual whistle-stop tours with packed competition itineraries, herding them like cattle, treating them little better than animals, zero fucks given to their health. Just how many munzes, Ben and Zizzers, backstage collapses and near-death experiences would it take for the IFBB to accept some responsibility for their athletes' well-being? But in lieu of any action, the smokescreen of Federation politics prevailed. In his 97 Olympia debut, Priest inexplicably had his 5th place stripped down to 6th, thanks to crybaby Kevin Lavro's post-show bitching. Motivated neither by money or glory, a move like this still exacerbated Priest's growing chasm of distrust for the IFBB's incompetence and apathy. After a marathon 10 shows in 1997, Priest left Weider for ProLab, a decision others claim would jeopardise his future placings, claims which only prove the corruption of contractual nepotism if true. But with guys like Kickinger and Schlierkampf earning 20 to 30,000 more than Priest for worse placings, it was a slap in the face to contractually consent to this level of financial fuckery. Priest broadcast these iniquities to the muscle media. The athletes were being fucked from all angles, he claimed. They possessed no marketing control over their image. The battle for the Olympia DVDs and the poorly timed contest VIP meets and greets were conducted at the athletes' expense with zero compensation. Articles, magazine covers and appearances forced athlete participation at promotional events without a single penny paid in recompense. Failure to dance to the IFBB's tune risked suspension and fines of up to $10,000. Just shut up and do their dance, Lee, others cautioned from the wings. Sure, these same voices complained from the safety of their shadowy anonymity, but even more frustrating, they never stood up to be countered when the time came. Priest focused exclusively on the 98 Olympia. Dorian's untimely exit left the top spot open, and the growing excitement for the new heir apparent was palpable. The question on everyone's mind: what direction would the IFBB go? Who would become their next king? It was also announced that this Olympia would be the first officially drug-tested for diuretics. It was an announcement that sent ripples of alarm through the growing stable of now nervous contenders under the chemical guidance of drug guru Chad Nichols. In retrospect, they needn't have worried. For all the posturing and talk, when the smoker battle cleared and the new King Coleman emerged victorious, those untested urine samples sat lonely and forgotten on a backroom table. Post-show, Priest petitioned fellow Aussie and former competitor Bev Francis for advice on possible improvements. "Leaner and harder," she answered with all the insight of an apathetic sock puppet. Francis, who had once herself been a victim of the scourge of politics, was now a bought and paid marionette for the bullshit judging machine and the IFBB dance routine. Priest criticised Francis' response as stupid, uneducated and egotistical, standing in utter disregard for a competitor's health and indicative of the IFBB's culture of disrespect and contempt shown towards its athletes. Heading into 1999, Priest's disillusionment grew with the frustration over the status quo and the one-sided contracts that could be torn up on a whim. There were no safeguards, athletes' unions, or competitor health funds. And the prize money remained a fucking joke. That year's Olympia saw its host, the comedian Sinbad, paid an amount almost equal to its winner. Money, Priest argued, that should have been divided among low-placing competitors who left empty-handed. Unfortunately for bodybuilding, it's a game of every man for himself. Play the game, Lee, play the game. But Lee was in no mood for fucking games. This was his and others' livelihoods. Priest remained a one-man army, speaking out against the iniquity. When informed by a reporter that based on an outspoken article that Lee had written, she had overheard the judges planning to collectively get Priest at the contest tomorrow, Lee withdrew from the show in disgusted protest. The year 2000 may have marked the new millennium, but nothing ever changed amidst the inertia of bodybuilding. Contrasted against the tedium of competitive burnout and his near-exploding resentment with the IFBB, the Groundhog Day grind of training and eating began taking a toll on Priest. Worse still, the physiques which had produced the most competitive lineups during the mystique of the Yates era were instead devolving into an ugly shitshow of GH guts and distended proportions. His heart no longer in it. This metaphor metastasized into the literal heart condition, sidelining Lee for most of 2001. On admission to hospital for difficulties breathing, Priest received a diagnosis that his left ventricle was operating at 40% efficiency. He was informed by one doctor that if he continued training, he would soon be joining that big gym in the sky. After days of inconclusive results, Priest checked out of the hospital and drove to the gym. In a test to see whether God intended him to live or die, he proceeded to knock out 20 reps in the leg press for 1,000 pounds. Not only did he survive, but he soon went on to achieve some respectable placings in many more pro shows. While recovering, Priest watched Daytona racer Dale Earnhardt hug his wife and son before the race which infamously became his last. Killed at the final lap, Priest wondered if this event was a foreshadowing for his own bodybuilding journey. As he reflected on the 2 decades of competition, he pondered if he was nearing his own final lap. Contemplating this philosophical crossroads, he took up drag racing, going on thereafter to win Rookie of the Year in his newfound sport. The hiatus and diversion refueled Priest's motivations, providing him a second wind and transferable skills, indulging his passion for racing. Learning how to minimize distractions, fine-tuned his bodybuilding efforts, sharpened his mental focus, and a now revitalized Priest returned strong with some respectable placings in 2002, taking second at the Ironman and winning the San Francisco Pro. His continued impatience with the IFBB's bullshit continued to simmer. In the lead up to the 2002 Olympia, Priest questioned why so many athletes returned home without a penny, despite competing in bodybuilding Super Bowl. He demanded greater transparency regarding the show's finances. Where the fuck was all this money going to exactly? His respect for the judges hit new lows when an all-time best Kevin Levrone was beaten by a visibly inferior Ronnie Coleman. By 2003, Priest was sick of bodybuilding. Joe Gold's health was declining rapidly. The aging Weeder sold out to a new bunch of mercenary corporate bastards who seemingly knew nothing about running a bodybuilding enterprise. Industry linchpin Wayne D'Amelia, the man largely responsible for steering the ship for the previous 20 years, was unceremoniously dumped, and the Olympia faced its first ever financial loss. Lee made it clear that his gripe was never with Joe or Wayne, who, while ruthless, were still passionate about the sport. The real behind-the-scenes bastard was bully boy autocrat Ben Weeder, the very same arsehole who had declared himself IFBB president for life and boasted of being a rabid fan and president of the International Napoleonic Society. Added to this culminating train wreck, the old guard were gradually changing. Wheeler and Ray were out. Orville Burke was in a coma after tricep surgery. Marcus Rule and Levrone tore their triceps. Art Atwood tore a quad. Cormier withdrew due to poor health. Priest's unshakable malaise once again took hold, resulting in a half-assed prep and an embarrassing 15th place at that year's Olympia. Not that human refrigerators like Greg Kovacs, Dennis James, or hobgoblins like Branch Warren were any better by comparison. Lee had always loved the monsters, but when it come to freaks, these new oddities had more in common with the bearded lady than the circus strongman. If the relationship with the IFBB had been sour when D'Amelia was in charge, under the new management, it was downright toxic. Priest was set to present an award at the 2005 Olympia, but IFBB director Robin Chang informed Lee's sponsor Twin Lab that Lee was not even permitted to set foot on the Olympia stage. Meanwhile, Wayne D'Amelio was setting up the PDI, a new federation promising to shake off the cobwebs and take the sport in a new direction of entertainment and judging standards. Lee enthusiastically signed on, winning the first ever event and again incurring the wrath of the IFBB. Instead of embracing the potential of a synergistic collaboration, the IFBB dropped the banhammer once again, and Priest was forced to watch the 2006 Olympia from the sidelines. When Lee tried congratulating the new Mr. Olympia, company man Jay Cutler ignored Priest's attempted well wishes, snubbing him again a second time later at the gym, positing the pathetically weak excuse that it wouldn't look good if the Mr. Olympia was seen talking to a banned IFBB athlete. So much for iron camaraderie and the solidarity of bodybuilding's brotherhood. When Priest requested a please explain, singling him out for contravening the rules, despite those same rules enabling felons, drug users, and known pornographers to skirt any kind of sanction, the IFBB's reply was clear and direct. They doubled Priest's 12-month suspension. The longevity track record for rival bodybuilding organisations has always proved fragile, and D'Amelia's PDI soon folded under mounting pressure on his physical and personal health. The IFBB's Jim Mannion reportedly danced a victory jig, claiming that he had caused the return of D'Amelia's cancer. Priest's world continued to collapse around him. After some disparaging comments Lee made against the efficacy of some of Twin Lab's supplements and his missing salary, his contract with Muscular Development and its supplement subsidiary were promptly severed by President Steve Bleckman. With the popularity of bodybuilding now on life support, the IFBB needed more than ever the excitement of dependable personalities, and they offered Lee an early reinstatement. With the passing of both his beloved grandparents and tearing his bicep while carrying a TV, misfortune complicated the possibility of any Priest comeback, and thus he was unceremoniously axed from the IFBB roster, this time for life. Consistent with a lack of anything resembling professionalism, Priest never received any formal communication from the IFBB regarding this lifetime ban. Handed down instead through the grapevine via a promoter who was forced to apologetically cancel Lee's upcoming guest posing. True to form, the IFBB blamed Lee. Priest's reticence to compete equated to Lee throwing his pro card back in Jim Mannion's face, in the words of Bob Ciccarello. Priest was barred from any related promotions, expos, or attendance at shows, even as a spectator. Priest wasn't just persona non grata, he was a pariah among peers, either too gutless or disinterested to even lend the support or recognition of his existence. The mere mention of Priest's name was enough to incur the wrath of the International Federation of Big Brother. Athletes like Jose Raymond, who publicly spoke favourably about Priest, received calls from the IFBB censuring him on any further discussion of the Lee topic. Priest's sponsor New Breed, who paid $70,000 for an Olympia booth, were told they couldn't display a large banner of Priest at this event or any other IFBB show. In a sport where testicular atrophy is the norm, it's not surprising that no one had the balls to stand tall with Priest in his unending fight for truth, justice, and a fair deal for those who sacrificed their health, propping up the weight of an organisation so willing to expend them as pawns for profit. And while it's impossible to see into the hearts and minds of men, it's likewise impossible to ignore the psychology and motivations behind the subconscious drive for superhuman muscularity. Even more so, what motivates some men to stand in isolation as the lone dissenting voice in rebellion to obvious corruption? Some might say it's Lee's deep-seated inferiority manifesting itself as a classic example of the Napoleon complex, a pre-internet version of a psychologically disturbed troll narcissistically courting attention at any and all costs. But like I said, maybe it won't be the best arms, the biggest guy pound for pound, or the youngest ever pro that underscores Priest's lasting impact on the sport. Or maybe Lee's true legacy will be as the guy who took an enduring David versus Goliath struggle against the hypocrisy, rapacious greed, and the closed minds while others stood silent and did nothing. Whatever his motivations, Priest showed true heart to his own detriment, paving the way for better conditions for those who compete today. The 2013 NABBA Universe, one last shot at redemption, a prestigious show in its own right as a title won by so many of the past greats from bygone eras, and a final opportunity to give the middle finger to those claiming Priest was washed up, finished, a has-been, plagued by doubt and apprehension. Taking the winner's dais, he was once again able to fly high, and for a brief moment in time, he could truly be called Master of the Universe.